A land of endless fjords, epic train rides, and fairy tale folklore, Norway is a country both inviting and mysterious. This September, I embarked on a 7-day voyage from the Netherlands to Norway on board Holland America's MS Rotterdam. Ports of call included Oslo, Kristiansand, Stavanger, and Fram before returning back to Amsterdam. And while I'm of course grateful for this experience, my God, what a tease. Norway captured a piece of my heart, craving unabashed landscapes, centuries of history, and a genuine kindness from people that should be the gold standard. A few hours in each port was simply not giving it the attention it deserves. And so, as I inevitably begin to plan my return trip, I thought I'd take a moment to recap the wonderful time I had on this unforgettable adventure. With only 24 hours to go before boarding, I enjoyed a pre-departure morning stroll around Amsterdam, taking in the famous Canals, trying my first stroopwafel, and indulging in a Van Stepele cookie. Can you believe this place only sells one type of cookie? Along the city streets, I found myself enamored by all of the tiny cars and the tilted houses. The entire day was spent wandering the city with no real agenda, except to continue my personal food tasting tour and to attend my reservation at the Anne Frank House. Photos were not allowed inside, but I will say that it was an incredibly moving exhibit that should be visited by all who come to Amsterdam. Make sure to secure your reservation in advance. After nearly 8 hours of exploring, I would consider the city to be highly walkable, or if you'd like to align more closely with the locals, I'd say it's also highly bikeable. The night wrapped with an undocumented stroll through the red light district. I'll let you imagine your own AK Faso tales for this outing, but rest assured I was in bed by 1 a.m. and ready for a quick stop at the Zaanse Schans early the next morning before stepping on board the MS Rotterdam. Sail away was accompanied by a warm sunset, fantastic views of Amsterdam, and a calm sea. I particularly enjoyed experiencing a lock for the first time, which happened shortly after departure. The captain made sure to announce the exact timing so folks could soak in the views as we went through. After a relaxing day at sea, I awoke the following morning to our approach into the sleepy port of Oslo. Sleepy in the sense that it was an early arrival, not that it lacked any character or vibrancy. That it certainly had plenty of. Oslo, the capital of Norway, sits at the head of the Oslo fjord in the southeastern part of the country and holds the honor of being designated one of the most sustainable cities in the world thanks to its high environmental standards, low carbon footprint, and green job creation. My family and I chose to start our day on the hop-on, hop-off bus tour, which we caught right from the cruise port. The tour included an informative audio guide and gave us the flexibility to discover the city at our own pace and from the comfort of a dry vehicle. Traversing the city streets, I found the blend of modern design and historic architecture to be a perfect complement to one another. The preservation of Norwegian heritage was of interest to us, paving the way to our first stop, the Norwegian Museum of Cultural History. This museum featured indoor exhibition halls showcasing clothing, furniture, and home decor of centuries past, as well as an outdoor park allowing guests to walk in and out of dozens of historic buildings, pay a visit to some friendly, or maybe that's not the right word, judgy faces, and take in the iconic design of the Stave church. We could have easily spent an entire afternoon wandering the nooks and crannies of this property. Next up, we chose to walk over to the Fram Museum, a space which highlights some of the most notable polar expeditions in history. The Fram itself is known to be the world's strongest wooden polar ship, and visitors are invited on board and below deck to explore what life might have been like sailing the Arctic regions long ago.
You're gonna get seasick?
Oh, how relaxing.
I loved that you could actually feel the texture and the weight of the ship beneath your feet, and it was not hidden behind some glass display to simply peer at. Besides exploring the Fram, I also took an interest in the Nansen photographs, an exhibition featuring photos from the 1800s on a quest to reach the North Pole. It's just amazing to not only think of the dangerous adventure these pioneers were on, but to also consider how profoundly bulky the cameras were at the time, and to imagine that someone, somehow, managed to capture it all in photographs. Now, if you're awaiting my visit to the highly rated Viking Museum of Oslo, well, that makes two of us. Unfortunately, the museum is currently closed and is set to reopen in, wait for it, 2026 or 2027. So let's just pencil that in a few years down the line. Our time in Oslo wrapped rather damply, but I was certainly glad to take in the views of the city as we sailed away later that evening. If I had to peg a port that most closely aligned with my thoughts on Norway before actually arriving here, I'd say Kristiansand takes the cake when it comes to capturing that seaside flair with distinctly Scandinavian vibes. Today, our family dispersed on varying adventures in and around the city. I chose to start my morning on a leisurely stroll along the quiet streets. Over the course of just a few hours, I would experience nearly every season of weather, but made it a point to check out some of the most recommended spots during the sunnier moments. This included stops at a nearby fortress, a promenade through the historic Old Town, and a visit to the local cathedral, notably one of the largest in Norway. Partway through my morning, I stumbled upon the Odd Bakery and felt compelled to try a famous Norwegian cinnamon roll. The dewy outdoor seating and crisp air perfectly accompanied the deliciously warm pastry, and I'd recommend this shop if you're seeking a local treat. On the other side of town, my family enjoyed a boat tour arranged through our cruise line. They said it was both informative and scenic, yet at times hard to understand and lacking enough time to adequately explore during the walking portion of the tour. Tough critics. Meanwhile, as sunlight enveloped the skies, I jumped onto the All Trails app to see if there was any decent hiking in the area, and found a 2.5-mile loop right near the cruise port through an old naval base. Walking to the trailhead was a bit disconcerting, as it felt like I was sneaking into some broken-down artist colony. Still not sure what all of this was, but once I made it past the oddities, I could not have been more pleased with this trail. Over the span of a few hours, I explored old military barracks, stumbled upon the largest grenade in the world, and took in the rugged coastline and all of the little treasures along the way. The highlight of this trail was the lighthouse, and I was lucky enough to observe it without a crowd. As our time in port was drawing near, I made my way back into town to try a few more Norwegian treats, the first being a hot dog. Now, if I'm being honest, Google was the one that influenced this decision. After conversing with a local woman at a 7-Eleven, I did learn that these hot dogs are popular, but mostly among kids. The dogs are wrapped in a pita and adorned with ketchup, mustard, and fried onions. To me, it just tasted like a standard hot dog, so I'm not going to be the first to put it on my list of highly recommended things to try, but it was a good snack nonetheless. Next up, however, was the ice cream. Nearly half of Norway's decadent ice cream market is made in a factory just outside of Kristiansand, so I, of course, had to give it a try. This certainly makes the list of must-eat foods in Norway. Bidding us farewell, the clouds moved in once again, closing out our time in Kristiansand and affording us the space to reflect on a great day.
This is just one of those port days that I don't really want to get out of bed.
It's not often that I wake up on vacation entirely unmotivated to do anything. But if there was a day that screamed, just stay in bed, or Enjoy your room service. This would be it. Our gloomy arrival into Stavanger was bittersweet as nearly the entire city was sprawled before our eyes, only to be obscured by thick and cold whipping rain. To this day, I cannot tell you what came over me, but I eventually decided that I wanted to go for a walk. And not just any walk. I was planning to walk 3.5 miles to the Sverd Fjell Viking monument. While I found the journey itself to be rather unremarkable, I did pause a time or two to take in the sights of various parks and local neighborhoods, including Old Stavanger, the largest surviving wooden house settlement in Northern Europe. And this is right outside of the cruise port, so very accessible to anyone that's sailing into town. Eventually, I arrived at the Three Swords. By the way, public transportation is easy to decipher here, and I could have arrived much quicker had I chosen to hop on a bus, so don't think a visit to this site requires an arduous trek on foot across town. The three swords of this monument are said to symbolize peace, unity, and freedom, marked at the location where Norway was gathered into one kingdom in 872. A quick bus ride back put me in the heart of Stavanger, a trendy city bustling with colorful streets, historic wharf houses, and boutique shops. Founded in 1125, this city has had a long and varied history, but its recognition is most closely attributed to its oil production. I spent an hour or so perusing before making my way back to the ship. We had a very early departure and were ready to set sail by 2:30 p.m. You know it's going to be an amazing day when you wake to the sound of waterfalls echoing through a fjord. Our final stop on this adventure was a visit to the small village of Flåm. As daylight crept across the sky, I was floored to see just how deep we had sailed into the fjord overnight. Mountain walls transcended the thick cloud layer above, and waterfalls seemed to be seeping uncontrollably down the rocky slopes. It was by far the most picturesque port of the trip. Today's adventure had us booked on a shore excursion through the ship. We were set to ride the famous Flåm Railway to a nearby mountain town and bicycle our way back down to port. Over 1 hour, the Flåmsbana takes visitors from sea level up 867 meters to the town of Undredal and has been described as one of the most beautiful train rides in the world. Of course, this was our view for most of the journey. Despite the obstructed scenery, I did learn some fun facts about the area. Much of Oslo's hydropower is produced here in Flåm, reindeer are common in this region, and an elusive forest spirit Huldra sometimes seduces men into the woods. We think we caught a glimpse of her at our waterfall stop along our train route. And for the local commuters, it's just another day of successfully avoiding her gaze. By the time we made it to our bikes, it was properly pouring. Our rain-resistant gear was barely trying, and we found ourselves shivering with anticipation. At this point, we just had to commit to the circumstances and endure a wet ride down the mountain. Fortunately, we were all genuinely excited to have an adventure. The journey down was a decidedly beautiful ride as we zoomed past tiny towns and cascading waterfalls. Occasionally, we were allowed to stop for photos, but mostly we were on the move. The valley unraveled around each corner and illuminated the stunning landscape in an almost haunting way.
I feel like the rain adds to this.
I know.
It's very mysterious, and
Yeah.
I feel like I'm going to see like a gnome.
I know.
As if on cue, we arrived at a small church and cemetery circa the 1600s, which we were allowed to peruse before continuing our descent to port. Soaked to the core, I spent about an hour thawing out back on the ship, which timed nicely with the sun finally emerging for the afternoon. Seizing the opportunity to explore in the sunlight, my brother, I, and his boyfriend rented a car to drive to nearby towns, while the rest of my family embarked on an electric fjord cruise. First in the world, mind you, through a UNESCO World Heritage Site. For our adventure, we first drove over to the nearby town of Undredal, supposedly one of several locations that inspired Disney's Frozen town of Arendelle. The drive there was incredibly scenic and remote, and even required us to do a bit of goat herding to proceed.
Don't peep at them like that. I'll go walk out front.
Once we arrived in the town, it was just as quaint and as picturesque as I had imagined. Coincidentally, the fjord cruise the rest of my family had booked was sailing past this area at the exact same time. They later told me how happy they were with that experience, gliding through famous fjords and seeing the scenery from the water. After some time in Undredal, we made our way to Stegastein viewpoint for another look at the fjords, again passing the rest of my family sailing along. This became a Where's Waldo situation that we all had a good laugh about later on that evening. The Stegastein viewpoint is a great spot to take in a panoramic view of the fjords, and is one that is highly pushed by the cruise line to visit. Because of that, it ended up feeling the most touristy to me, but that should not discount the Norwegian scenery. It's safe to say that everyone was pretty bummed to see our time in Flåm draw to a close. If a port could be described as magical, I think this one deserves the title. The landscape and the people are what made it so special. And with that, we sailed into the sunset, grateful for an incredible adventure in Norway, and yearning for the day we can return to explore more of this beautiful country.